Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. Today's video is a little different from my regular lessons in which I teach you how to write answers for IB psychology. In today's video, I'm going to address some common misconceptions that students have about the IB psychology course. So this video should be useful to all the students who are going to appear in October, November 2025 and May 2026, because then the syllabus is changing after that. So whatever I am giving out in this video is related to the current syllabus, which is going on right now. As you know, the results have just come out for IB psychology. If you're interested in seeing what results my students have got, which have thankfully been really good, you can check out my social media handles or my YouTube community posts. Unfortunately, many students have not done well. So there are students who are approaching me also now who want to give their retakes. So they have got a 4 or a 5 or even less than that in IB, whereas they were predicted a much higher grade. So they're very disappointed with their results. And some of my students also, they've shared some screenshots with me of recent discussions that were going on in social media sites like Reddit and Discord. And I'm not surprised to come across those discussions because these issues have been going on for a long time as far as the IB course is concerned. It's just that students are becoming more vocal about it now. They're realizing these problems more now. So the top thing that is coming out from all these discussions is that students are predicted much higher grades in many cases than what they get ultimately in the papers. And then they are left wondering whether IB is targeting them or their school or their country. And only they are not getting good marks because the board is somehow against them or their school or their nation. There's no such thing. These things happen even for the other boards that I teach, even for Cambridge, when results come out for A level psychology. These discussions take place that in one particular country, students were predicted high grades and then they did not get those. So the board is somehow targeting their country, and there's this big conspiracy theory that comes up. It's absolutely untrue. The board, if anything, would want to increase their reach in any country. They would not want to defame themselves and get out of a country totally. So instead of focusing on those conspiracy theories which lead to nothing and which are absolutely baseless, I think you should become familiar with some problems that are actually going around as concerns any psychology course, in your case, the IB course. The truth is, if at all I can blame the board for anything, it is for not regulating teaching quality across schools. I'm not exaggerating. Most of the students who come to me, and you must have also heard this nowadays because you all are very active on social media, you have discussions with other students. In most of the schools, teachers are leaving halfway. They are leaving just before the exams. If students ask about the qualifications or credentials of the teachers, they are just ex-students from the school, or they just have a master's degree without any idea about what exactly the IB curriculum is. So what happens because of this is because the teachers either are not familiar with the IB curriculum or they've just been appointed on an ad hoc basis, they're just temporary. That is why they are not able to teach according to the curriculum requirements. And that is why they end up predicting very high grades for students because they don't know actually how to estimate a grade because they are not, like I said, familiar with the curriculum. So according to how an examiner would mark it in the IB, they are not able to predict according to that. There are very specific requirements that you have to meet. They are not difficult. It's just that you have to have knowledge of these requirements, and when you write according to them, only then you get marks. It's not subjective. It's not that, as a teacher, this answer is looking good to me, it's looking detailed, or the terminology used is good, so okay, high marks will be given. They will not be given unless requirements are met. So that is the core issue actually which is taking place. Predictions are being made without keeping in mind what the requirements are, so they end up being inflated, and then you don't get those sort of grades when the actual results come out. So keeping that in mind, from my experience over the years, when students come to me fresh, especially what I come to know how things are going about in their school, from that I have realized that 5 misconceptions are there which are found in almost all students of IB, which I want to clarify in this video. So let's begin with the first one. Today because I have a habit of like writing down things when I'm teaching you, like when I'm giving regular lessons, I've just put up a kind of a whiteboard on the screen. So I just keep writing down what you're saying. It'll just be there in front of your eyes. As such, I'm not teaching you any content. One misconception is that ERQs in IB, and by this I mean the paper 1 or the paper 2 ERQs, are only about studies. So most students, when they come to me and they tell me that, they're not scoring well on the ERQs, and in many cases they are scoring well, but they themselves are doubtful, because when they've come across better students, like from schools in which they're teaching actually to the IB curriculum, the answers are not matching with those students, so they are worried about what will happen to the board. Then when I look at their answers, their plans which they have made for the ERQs, I see a very typical pattern. Whatever question is there, let's take a common question. Discuss the role of neurotransmitters on behavior. Now, for that question, they'll have a definition for neurotransmitters. 2 studies will be there related to neurotransmitters, and there will be evaluation points for each study. That's all that will be there for in their ERQ outline. So this is the first issue. Assuming that those 22 markers essays, you call them ERQs or LAQs, are just about having 2 studies for any given topic and having evaluation points for the studies. That is not what the ERQs are meant to be. Students, in fact, are so ignorant of what type of ERQs are asked. In many cases, they don't even have access to past question papers from their schools, which is surprising to me. And if they do, they don't even read the question, how it differs. It's like they see, in this year neurotransmitters was asked, in the next year neurotransmitters was asked, in that years they just see the word neurotransmitters, they don't even read the full question. In one year, the question could have been, discuss the role of neurotransmitters in behavior. In another year, the question could have been, evaluate studies showing the role of neurotransmitters in behavior, something to that effect. So no doubt in 2 years, they have asked about neurotransmitters. But have they asked the same question about neurotransmitters? No. In one of the years, they've asked you to evaluate studies around neurotransmitters. In another year, they've asked you to discuss the role of neurotransmitters. So when the questions are different, no doubt they're about the same topic, but they're different questions, how can your answers be the same? So firstly, you cannot have a formula. You cannot have a standard template which you can use to answer all ERQs. And definitely this blind approach of, oh, I just need to have 2 studies and I need to evaluate them no matter what ERQ is asked. That is not the correct approach for ERQs. Then of course you'd be wondering, what is the correct approach? I have discussed it a lot in my lesson videos. If you see, recently I have uploaded a paper 2 video in which I've solved the November 2024 paper. In that, I have addressed different type of ERQs and I've shown you how they're different from each other. Even in videos in which I've just demonstrated 1 or 2 ERQs and evaluated them in front of you, there I have always kept in mind what the question is asking about and whether the answer is reflecting what is asked in the question or not. Is the answer relevant to the question? So you can check out those videos to see actually how you're supposed to write the ERQ. All ERQs are not the same. That is what I want to clarify here. And in this video also ahead, I will be discussing some more misconceptions about ERQ. So then this thing will come up again, how ERQs are not the same. One more thing that I want to tell you under this, like one thing, like I told you, ERQs can be about the same topic, but they're not asking the same thing. Another thing is, in ERQs, they're not all about studies because they're also about theories or concepts. So, when they ask you about the role of neurotransmitters in behavior, no doubt you narrow down. You select one neurotransmitter. Let's say, for example, you select dopamine, and the behavior you select is motor behavior. So, how dopamine impacts movements. Or you select serotonin, and for the behavior you take mood, depression, say. So then you explain how serotonin impacts mood. So yes, you have to narrow down to a particular neurotransmitter and a particular behavior. But that does not mean then you just start giving studies related to that neurotransmitter and behavior. So say for example you start discussing Caspi et al. And how they showed that serotonin impacts depression. That's not all there is to the answer. Of course, that is a part of it. But in general, what is serotonin? What is its role? How does it impact mood? If serotonin is more, what is the impact on mood? If it is less, what is the more impact on mood? Conceptually, what have you understood about serotonin as a neurotransmitter? Conceptually, what have you understood about serotonin and its link with mood? That also needs to come across in your ERQ. If it's an evaluate the studies type of ERQ, of course, that will be less of what you will cover in the ERQ. The conceptual part will be less. It won't be like not there at all. It will be less. But if it's a discuss type of ERQ or evaluate research done in the area of serotonin type of ERQ, then definitely you have to give good weightage to the conceptual part of the neurotransmitter and behavior. How can it be all about the studies when the question is not asking you only for the studies? So, number one thing you need to do is remove from your mind that there is this standard studies based template on which you can answer essays, and instead start focusing on how you can involve theories and concepts as well along with the studies into your ERQs. Now, when I say you have to include concepts and theories as well, then of course you have to evaluate them as well in critical thinking. Let's say again, for example, if I'm taking serotonin and its role on mood, so I'm taking serotonin as and depression for neurotransmitters. I will not only evaluate the quality of a study like Caspi et al. For that answer. No doubt I will show my critical thinking by pointing out some strengths and weaknesses of the Caspi study. But in general, as an area of research, when it comes to serotonin and neurotransmitter, what are the strengths of looking at this area? What are the weaknesses of looking at this relationship? For example, if I see how serotonin affects depression, that leads me to treatments, regardless of what the Caspi et al. Is studies doing to support this relationship. By itself, looking at the impact of serotonin on mood helps me to develop some applications. So that's a strength of looking into the area completely. And in terms of weaknesses, of course, overall, again, regardless of one particular study, there might be some flaws in which research has been done. File draw problems could be there. I remember addressing this in the November 2024 video, which I have done. Or, for example, it might be a reductionist biased approach whereby we are assuming only one neurotransmitter impacts behavior, whereas behavior is multi-determined. Many neurotransmitters and many other factors would also be impacting mood, which we are not looking into. So the area as a whole is reductionist. So when you're planning your ERQs, you consider concepts, theories as well. You also consider critical thinking of those concepts and theories. I remember there's this very popular and very respected website, amazing website for IB, and many schools refer to that. So even I refer to it a lot in my classes, been very helpful. And of course, because the school is recommending, I have to teach my students according to what is there on that website. So I remember recently, not very recently, but recently after quite some time, the author on that website, especially for the discuss type of ERQs, he started putting up this separate section evaluating the theory or concept, and he started saying that you need to give for a discuss ERQ one solid paragraph evaluating just the theory or concept by itself, besides evaluating the study. So even he has acknowledged this thing, that even he must have observed, I feel, although he's not said that, that in most schools, critical thinking has been restricted to just the studies. So then he has recommended that we should evaluate the larger theories as well. And for your official textbooks, if you look at them, like if you actually study properly from the official book by Sir Popov, he has always brought about this thing when he has given this argument based approach rather than study based approach, how much he's emphasized on that for ERQs. A very central point in that has been that you should evaluate the larger theory or concepts, and you should have arguments around those, which even I have addressed in many of my videos. So definitely you have to have higher order thinking when it comes to scoring well on ERQs. If you take this approach, which is going around, that no matter what the question is, I'm just going to give two studies and evaluate them, you end up scoring less. It's not like you get a 0 for the ERQ, but you just don't achieve the high mark band. And then on multiple ERQs, if this is happening, you're on the lower mark band or the moderate level mark band, then how are you going to get a 7 on the paper? How are you going to get a 6 on the paper? So that's why overall you remain on a 4 or 5. This is one of the biggest misconceptions. That's why I've taken it right at the beginning. If you can work on this and improve on this, then definitely you are going to uh, take your grade much higher. So start working on this immediately. And within this, only one more thing that I want to address is over emphasis by many schools and over reliance by many students on online resources. I'm not discrediting online resources at all. They're very, very useful, especially if you take a quality online resource such as the one by Professor John Crane in Thinking or Think IB. There's no substitute to that because Professor Crane has years of experience. He's an examiner, he's written so many books, and he's the one who has authored that website. He's upped his textbook, what he used to write in the textbook, he's made it all the more interactive, all the more well organized by putting it on a website. So no substitute to an online resource like that. There are many other independent online resources also which are very, very useful. They are written by examiners, experienced teachers, experienced tutors. But then there are those online resources which have been written by students. And again, I'm not discrediting all students. Some students are very respectable, they have got very high grades themselves, and they're sharing that with other students, which is commendable because they're not getting anything in return and they're just putting it out for free. So much appreciation to those students. But then there are those resources which I'm referring to here, which have very less credibility because we don't know exactly who's putting them. Seems some students are putting them whose grades are unknown. With what background they're putting them up, we don't know. And what is there on those notes? They are just some flashcards. They are just some quick bullet pointers on various studies mainly. Again, the theory approach is not found, the study approach is there. And the way those resources are put out, the way they are presented in a very misleading way, I would say, this is all you need to get high marks. This is all I refer to, and I got a 7. And there's no proof for that person who's put up the notes to get a 7. So we don't even know what is the credibility of the source of that website. And then very obviously, when you look at those notes, if that is what you're going to write in the paper, you're not going to score well. It's very apparent. You won't maybe reach beyond a 3 or 4 if you're referring to that. That also I'm giving a lot of credit to what is written there. So refer to online resources, but don't refer only to online resources. That is one thing I would say. Such excellent textbooks are there by Professor Popov, Professor Lawton, Professor Crane. Why do you think so many textbooks have been written, so much detail is being given just for the sake of it? Like someone puts up a few notes, bullet pointers online, says this is all you need for 7. And they tell you, the textbooks are a waste of time, and you just believe it. You don't believe what credible authors are doing. They're putting in so much effort from their years of experience in writing those books. You don't believe them that knowledge or that content is required, but you believe some unknown person who's claiming anything on the internet. Use your sound judgment. In the IB course, I know you do TOK, you do your EEs and all. They teach you to think critically in those things. Use that critical thinking when it comes to studying also. So if so much knowledge is given in your textbook, even if you are not genuinely interested in knowledge and your only focus is getting marks in the exam, it's still required. You still are required to go to those textbook contents to score well, because like I told you, theories concepts are equally if not more important than the studies. So don't believe anyone who tells you, oh, you just need to know these key points about the studies and two evaluation points in one line each and you're going to get very high marks. That is the reason then you feel, how come I didn't get marks after writing those things? Because you're believing the wrong thing to begin with. Also, I remember now online resources by Professor Trixon. uh, I hope I'm giving the right name. Sorry, Professor Travis Dixon, Thematic Education. Excellent. You should refer to those type of resources. Very credible authors, very credible professors who are writing those things on those websites. But not just to anybody who's putting up flashcards or making tall claims. Please stay away from those resources. The person who's put up those resources is managing to make some money out of it, maybe by putting a few ads which are running on their website and drawing traffic from your site. So they are gaining a lot by making those claims. They are losing nothing. You are losing your grade by referring to those resources. So make a wise decision for yourself. Okay, so this is one misconception. Another one which I've come across is the whole, thing around command terms. This is also related to ERQs. Are command terms important? Are they not important? The misconception is that command terms are not important. If command terms were not important, there wouldn't be multiple command terms. There have been very credible professors also who've argued like aggressively that command terms are not important. But you need to read what they're telling you. You need to read fully what they're telling you. They're not saying outright command terms are not important. They have explained in their posts that why we shouldn't fret over command terms or why we should not give them undue importance. They have not said that you don't take into account only the command terms. That is not what they've put across. So anyone who's telling you, regardless of the ERQ is evaluate or it's contrast or it's to what extent or it is discussed, you write the same answer. That is very misleading. Otherwise, why do they have different command terms? You do have to take them into account. The only thing is not giving undue importance. And what we mean by that, what I would put it across as is, don't take the command term in isolation. Read the command term along with the whole question. So if you have a command term, evaluate. Now, if you just look at evaluate, you would feel that, oh, evaluate and discuss, there's no difference. But read the rest of the question. If it is evaluate the studies on, let's take another example, schemas. So let's take cognitive. Evaluate studies on schemas. That is different from saying discuss schema theory. Generally, there's a pattern when they want you to focus on studies, those type of ERQs, they use the evaluate command term. When they want you to discuss the theory, then they use the discuss command term. So when you take it in light of the whole question, there is a difference in the command terms which are being used, because one command term is suggesting that your answer should be about the studies. The other one is suggesting it should be about the theory and the study should just be a part of it. But sometimes, like, it's not always that evaluate the studies will only have evaluate. It could also be evaluate research on schema theory. That becomes different from evaluating studies, because there you're not evaluating individual studies. When they say evaluate research, they mean overall research in the area. They don't want you to critically think about particular studies. So again, whenever it comes to research or studies, anything related to that, evaluate is used. When it comes to they want larger arguments, larger critical thinking, they use discuss. So command terms do matter. Again, if you want more details on this, please visit any of my lessons, because whenever I teach you how to write ERQs, I do explain to you how to read the question first. And I don't know, some of you might be feeling why we are giving so much time on reading the question. Why not write the answer and focus on that? This is the reason. Because you need to read the question carefully to know exactly what is being asked for and tailor your answer to that. Related to this only, looking at both the first points which I've given, they're related to each other. Like, how do you approach the ERQs? I would suggest when you make your own outlines for the ERQs, this is something which is being emphasized more for the newer syllabus which is coming in from being examined from 2027. But I would say this applies very much to the current syllabus also. You cannot exhaustively prepare answers for all ERQs. That is also one misconception actually, that there are very limited number of questions that can come in ERQs. I can just prepare all the answers for all those questions. I can just memorize them and I can write in the paper. That is not the case. So when you prepare your outlines, I would suggest, as it is done in the other boards also, instead of preparing specific answers, just prepare plans, and in those plans include larger conceptual understanding. So say it's schema theory. What do you understand by schema? What is schema theory? Who gave it? Like Bartlett gave it, and I'm not talking about the War of the Ghost study. I'm talking about the schema theory. What did he try to explain about schemas in the theory? How did he define them? How did he relate them to various cognitive processes? So in your plan, have a few points that if I have to discuss the concept or theory at large in length, say it's a discuss type of question, what points can I give? Next, have points which show critical thinking about the larger concept or theory. As I just mentioned some time back, like one professor has also mentioned on his website that you need to have a solid paragraph for discuss. So how he has suggested, and how even I have been suggesting in my videos, whatever larger concept is, they have strengths and weaknesses for that also, not just for the studies. So make sure that is also part of your plan. Then have at least 2 studies which are related to, in this case we are taking the example of schema, so 2 studies around schema. And then critical thinking for those studies. Also, before you jot down the studies, what is the argument around those studies? Again, I've discussed this a lot in my videos. If you're introducing a study, let's say you're introducing very commonly, I think for schema, it's Bransford and Johnson, either the washing machine study or the washing the clothes, the balloon study. Now, what has that study got to do with schemas? So, before introducing Bransford and Johnson, before summarizing it, why would you introduce that study in a schema question? You have to make it explicit that because it shows us how schemas are related to memory. And again, you should have some points around that, at least 2 or 3 points. This is what the study shows exactly. And then you introduce or you summarize the study. So for every topic which is there, instead of thinking, oh, this will be the question, this will be my answer, so let me finalize the answers. Instead of that, take a topic at a time, like take schema, have some points that you could describe for schema and schema theory, have some points which you could use to evaluate schema theory at large, have some background to the studies or some links or some arguments to the studies that you're going to introduce, have summaries of those studies, have critical thinking points for those studies. Prepare that way instead of preparing final answers in which you only evaluate studies for a topic and coming down on the mark band. One more thing related to this, I think I've addressed it in one more of my videos. The arguments which are there on the studies, there are some schools, famous schools, which are saying that you need to have an argument and a counter argument for every topic. So if it's schema, one study should be an argument and another study should be a counter to that argument. There's no such pattern. Both studies can be related arguments. Both studies can reflect arguments which are stemming from each other. So there's one argument that you've given, and then the next one is an extension of that. The next one does not have to be a counter argument. It's just that you should know what is the purpose of doing those studies, what those studies are showing about the larger concept, and you should be able to explain that. These might seem like small things to you, but they are very big things. These are the reasons, these small things are the reasons why people are losing marks in the exam. So you need to plan out like this, how I'm telling you, if you want to get 6 or 7 and you don't want to be disappointed at the end. So taking the time right now, a few minutes to just understand these basic things is going to come a long way when it comes to your exams. One, before I complete the command terms thing, some students are very clear on, contrast is a different command term compared to evaluate or discuss. So in contrast, they know throughout the answer. Simultaneously, they have to keep on comparing two theories. Say they're asking you contrast theories of memory. So they do know that, if you're taking MSM and you're taking WMM, 1 point for MSM, a counter for WMM. Then the next one for MSM, on the same argument, a point on WMM. But what I want you to become aware of now, like I have explained, it's not only the contrast command term which is different. So it's not like contrast is on one side, to what extent discuss and evaluate on one side. Every command term is different from the other, taken in relation with the whole question. So make sure you know how to address all the command terms. And when it comes to those research studies and ethics type of ERQs that are there, their evaluate is used. They can use discuss, but generally if we see the papers, they use evaluate. Again, something not to be taken for granted. That's why I'm pointing it out. Oh, if it's evaluate, it's going to only be research methods, or it's going to be ethics. No. Demand from your school that they give you the past papers and read the questions in the past papers. Don't skim through the questions. You feel you're saving 5-10 minutes, those 5-10 minutes are costing you an entire grade. Give those 5-10 minutes, read how the questions are framed. When they tell you evaluate the studies on schema, evaluate research on schema, discuss schema theory, see how the phrasing differs. Even better if you can get hold of the mark schemes. Read the mark schemes. See how the mark scheme requirements differ from when it's an evaluate the studies ERQ versus when it is discuss the theory ERQ, where it is contrast the theories ERQ. Check how the requirements change. Check how the emphasis of the mark scheme changes. When it is evaluate the studies, they list out the studies and they mention theory should also be the concept, but they don't emphasize on that because that itself shows that focus on these studies. For example, they'll say Bransford and Johnson can be taken, Anderson and Pritchard can be taken, Brewer and Trains could be taken. Why? Because it's an evaluate the studies, so they're listing out these studies can be taken. Read the further below the studies what critical thinking points they have given for guidance on the mark scheme. Critical thinking could be about generalization from the studies, about ethical issues around the studies, about methodology of the studies. Now compare this with what the mark scheme says for a discuss ERQ, discuss schema theory. Now you won't see emphasis on the studies. Now you'll see emphasis on the arguments. Students could argue about how schema relates to memory, how schemas cause errors in thinking, which errors in thinking are caused by schemas, how schemas are related to problem solving and decision making. And studies should also be there. Now studies become the also part, but the arguments, the points about schema become the main thing. Why? Because it's a discuss command. And now look at the critical thinking points. Now the critical thinking points that are there below the mark scheme, they are no longer about generalization from the study sample size method. No, now they are about biases in schema theory, reductionism in schema theory, alternative explanations, quality of research done in the area of schema. So now suddenly the mark scheme has become all about schema theory at large and critical thinking around schema theory rather than individual studies. So if you just take those 5-10 minutes, say even half an hour, 1 hour, to just carefully read a few questions, how they are structured and how mark scheme requirements differ from question to question. That is enough to take your writing to the next level, to take your preparation in the correct direction, which you're missing out just because someone has given you the wrong advice that, oh, ERQs are so simple, just prepare the studies. And then in school also they give you high marks for taking that one size fits all approach, and then you're overconfident, oh, I'm going to get that very high grade in the paper. That is where disappointment comes from, not because the board is conspiring against you. The board has no reason to do that. Okay, another very common misconception that I've come across is that in ERQs or in even SAQs for that matter, you always need unconditionally very detailed descriptions of studies. So there is this belief that, if I want to up my marks, because in some cases what is happening, I want to up my marks, I'm seeing my answers are not matching those which professors are recommending on their books, in their books and on their websites, and they're not matching with those students who are getting good guidance in their school. So how should I up my answer? I should up it by adding lot of explicit details about study. So supposing, let's say I'm taking Brewer and Trends for schema theory, I should memorize how many participants were there. I should give the exact number of participants. I should memorize the results. I should give exact percentages, means. That will get me high marks. Again, that shows ignorance of mark scheme requirements. Nowhere in the mark schemes do they mention that if you give one detail from the study, we are going to up your marks. Of course, that counts for good understanding, good knowledge, but that's just one part of writing the answer. It's not everything about writing the answer. I had made a video a little time before on theory versus study based SAQs. And thank you for the excellent response that you gave me on that video. In that, I have discussed this at length, how a study focused SAQ is different from a theory focused one. So even SAQs are multiple. Just I was explaining to you, ERQs are different, so are SAQs. You should be aware of that to score well. Some SAQs ask you describe one theory. Sorry. Some SAQs ask you describe one study related to schema theory. Some SAQs ask you describe schema theory with reference to a study. These are two different SAQs. In the first one, they've asked you to describe the study, meaning, for example, describe Brewer and Trends if that is your choice. In the second one, they're asking you to describe schema theory. Brewer and Trends study is just going to be an illustration of the schema theory. So there's a difference in how you approach the SAQs, where you give more weightage. Do you expand more on the theory or do you expand more on the study? In those questions in which you have to expand more on the study, you should definitely aim for giving more details of the study. So if it is like the Brewer and Trend study you're writing about and it's an SAQ explicitly asking you for describe the study, put your best foot forward in giving as many details as you can. But keep in mind, even in that case, there is no such requirement that you have to memorize and give exact number of participants, exact results. It's preferable to give that. But even if you don't give that, you can score full marks. So read the mark schemes carefully. Now coming to when the theory type of SAQ is there, in which there's no explicit requirement of emphasizing a study. They're absolutely not required that you give such details of the studies. You have to give the study very briefly, in fact. Otherwise, you end up giving it more weightage than you're being asked to give. So you give a very short summary, aim, procedure, results, and conclusion of the study without unnecessary details. In fact, deliberately omitting unnecessary details so that you can save that word count to explain the concept, even if you know what the details are of the study. So here the misconception I'm addressing is, if I can rote learn every aspect of a study and write it down, I'm going to get very high marks. That does not happen. As I've explained, not for the SAQs, not for the ERQs either. In fact, even for say and evaluate the study ERQ, in which you would feel the study is the main focus, which it is. It is the critical thinking of the study which is more of a focus. Let's assume there is an ERQ, evaluate studies for schema theory, and one of the studies you're taking is Brewer and Trent study. Now, of course, again, if you can give explicit details about Brewer and Trent, excellent, do give those details. But you know what they're looking out for more in the answer? Evaluate the study. Can you critically think about the study? For example, can you give a strength like it was conducted in an office without participants' knowledge of them, going to be asked about the office settings later to see how their schema is at play. So that increases realism or ecological validity because there was no possibility of demand characteristics and so forth. These type of points, evaluation points, can you explain in detail with context and reasoning? That is what they're looking out for more than the description of the study. Do you remember every detail of the study? So even in an evaluate the studies type of ERQ, if you don't give specific details like sample size, exact results, exact sampling technique, which culture the participants came from, how many males and females were there, even there you can score full marks without giving these details. It's preferable to give as many details as you can. Relevance matters more than details. If you are giving those details, if for example you're pointing out that gender skew was then the sample, are you using it to evaluate the study further? Are you making a point on some problem with generalizability to the genders? Then give those points. If you're not doing any evaluation and the ERQ is about evaluation, you're not evaluating those aspects, then at best they just show you have good knowledge, but you can't use that knowledge to compensate for critical thinking that you're not able to show later. Okay, so regardless of their SAQs or ERQs, as I mentioned, even if explicitly the focus is on studies, you don't have to give each and every detail about the study. It takes you nowhere. You have to give relevant details. And what I mean by relevant, what I've explained to you, which somehow help in furthering your critical thinking about the area, which strengthen the argument that you're making. They illustrate some points about the argument you have made. Those kind of details you need to give. Not any detail just for the sake of showing, oh, I have learned the study very well. You don't get marks for showing how much you've learned or how much you've memorized. You get marks for meeting mark scheme requirements. That is the reality, and it's good if you can accept it immediately. Okay, coming to the next most common misconception that I've come across, it is that breadth is more important than depth. This is related to critical thinking for ERQs. Again, I feel that this is somehow being encouraged by those less credible online resources. So what these resources do is they have a study. Let's take another example, another very common study students take, like if I take from socio-cultural approach, the Tajfel study, the Klee and Kadinsky study. Now what they will do on those resources to show you, that if you use our points, you can get higher marks. They will list the study and they will give you 5 or 10 evaluation points around the study. So say it's the Klee and Kadinsky study, they just list out strength after strength. So there was manipulation of the IV also, and standardization was also there, and situational factors were kept in control. Participants were randomly assigned, so participant variables were also controlled. Similarly, for the weaknesses also, they will give you a big list of weaknesses. And that encourages the thinking in students that, if I write 5 or 10 points in evaluation, I'm going to get better marks than if I write only 1 or 2 points. So let me refer to these type of resources which are giving a heavy number of points, and let me include all of them in my ERQ. Again, that's not how it works. quality always supersedes quantity in the IB exam. So even if you write just one critical thinking point, and I mean it, if you just write one strength or weakness, but you evaluate it with such good context and reasoning that it shows how critically you're able to think, that is much superior to giving 5 or even 10 points of evaluation. Depth always wins over breadth when it comes to IBERQs. So now what should be your approach? Already I've given you a rough template how to plan for your ERQs. So in that rough template, when you are doing your critical thinking about the concept or theory, or when you're doing the critical thinking for the studies, both those cases, list those best points which you will be able to elaborate well rather than trying to increase the number of points you're giving. So select, for example, one strength, one weakness of the theory. One strength, okay, say two strengths and two weaknesses of the studies. Because say if evaluate the studies question comes, maybe you want to give more points. But select those points which are the most relevant and which you can give the best context and reasoning for. For example, let's say in a study like the Kriyan-Kadinsky study, which I gave you the example. No doubt there is manipulation of the IV also, which helps to establish cause effect between minimal group differences and stereotyping. And of course, then there are controls also. So there are situational variables which were controlled by the researchers, such as the duration of exposure to the paintings, the information that was given about the other group of participants. Now select from these. Of course, both the points are equally good. And for a student who can give context and reasoning well, they will take any of these and they will elaborate very well. But you decide, you know yourself best, which one will you be able to write better about? Will you be able to write better about the manipulation of the IV? Will you be able to write better about situational variables? Is it that you have enough examples to support your point? If you're giving a point on situational variables, take that point. But don't take it if you just know, oh, there were many situational variables which were controlled, but you don't know any examples of which variables were controlled. You don't know the purpose of why they were controlled. You don't know how controlling them helped to see a direct relation between the IV and DNA. If you can't explain those things, don't take that point. Don't take the point just for the sake of naming the point. You know, in fact, with the breadth approach, you can get a 0 in critical thinking, and then you're left wondering, I wrote so much, but I did not get marks. You don't get marks for writing so much. You get marks for writing well. So you could end up saying situational variables, this, that. You write a full paragraph on that, but just because you have named everything, you haven't linked anything to the study which you're evaluating. You haven't given reasoning for why those things were there. You end up getting 0 because it's purposeless. Those points the examiner knows you could have fitted into any answers. It seems you have learned a standard formula like 4-5 points and you're giving it for any study which is similar in methodology. Don't give that impression to the examiner, and the examiner is fully justified in giving you a 0 for doing that because it shows absolutely no critical thinking. Just to be able to use a little jargon like extraneous variables, manipulation of IV, why should anyone give you credit for that? Okay, so make sure you're taking the depth approach. This is also why planning is very important. The fact is, any study that you take for evaluation, right now I'm just talking about the studies, I'm not even talking about the larger theories. Any study that you take, it is having some core methodology. Say it's a lab experiment, or say it's a field experiment, say it's a survey. So any strengths and weaknesses of a survey, of a lab experiment, whatever it is, you will be able to say for the study. So the moment you know it's a lab experiment, you can argue for it having good control, for it having manipulation, quantitative data. You can argue against it for not having ecological validity, not having qualitative data as its primary source, not having some ethics maintained, like some sort of deception being there, having possible demand characteristics because participants knew that they are in a study. These are points you can literally fit in them to any lab experiment that you're discussing, not only the Kriyan-Kadinsky study, any study which is there. Planning is important because you have to check, when I take this particular point for this study, can I make it relevant to this study? Can I give it context from this study? Can I apply reasoning for this point in light of the study which is there. That you can do only when you have your plans ready, at least for a few studies, ideally for all. But at least for a few studies, you've actually practiced and checked whether I'm able to do this or not. You've not just thought, oh, I know a list of this and a list of that, and let now any question come, I'm going to write it. Why is the IB giving you 2 years to prepare for your papers? Because this is what you're supposed to do in preparation throughout those 2 years. As obvious as it might seem to some of you, you'd be surprised to know majority of the students are not doing these things. They are just bookmarking some online resources, reading them in the last minute, going and writing in the paper as those resources presented the notes without modifying them, without working on them. And then they're getting 3 and 4 in the IB psychology. And then these discussions are becoming more and more aggressive on social media sites as to why am I not scoring on the IB? Is there some conspiracy against me? There's no conspiracy. Your preparation is not in the right direction. Okay, so make sure you plan correctly. And very important related to this, that's why knowing your fundamentals is so important. Most schools do begin with research methods. That is one good thing I've come across, especially, of course, the good schools which are doing well. By good schools, I don't mean those which are charging exorbitant fees or which just have a reputation since old time. Good schools, I mean those which are really putting in efforts to teach students. They do definitely begin with research methods. But those schools which are not sincere about teaching, which are just having those ad hoc teachers who are not even familiar with the IB curriculum, which are not personally supervising whether the curriculum is being taught correctly, like everything's just been taken for granted. In those schools, research methods, I've seen the way they are treated, the way students come and tell me is, it's important only for paper 3, and even if for paper 3, like you're an HL student, you're going to do paper 3, it's something you can deal with it in the last minute, because in paper 3 these fixed questions are there. And so as if the way they approach it is you can have fixed answers for those fixed questions, which is amazing. Of course you can't have fixed answers, but that is what is being put in the mind of students. So research methods is only for that, whereas in reality research methods are the basis on which you prepare your evaluation points for all your ERQs. Research methods are important for your IE also. They are critical for your EE also if you do it in psychology. So how can research methods be secondary? How can they be something kept for the last minute? So as I have told you already, this should be your outlining, your template for your ERQs, your ERQ plans basically. But even before that, the starting point, as I've mentioned here, be clear on your research methods. Know, for example, what a true experiment is. Know what are its strengths and weaknesses. Practice applying that definition and those strengths and weaknesses to various studies, not only those paper 3 stimuli, also to studies which are there in the course for paper 1 and paper 2, for your Maguire study, Dragansky study, those common ones which we are taking. Apply those there and then only start preparing your large ERQ points after you're confident you know how to apply your research methods correctly. By correctly, I mean with context and reasoning to the studies which you're learning. And then, besides research methods, because evaluating larger theories and concepts is not just about methodology, it's not just about research methods. Issues and debates, what I would call it. The IB does not always use this term. So you could also just think about it as critical thinking for studies should be next. Many students are not even aware, at least for lab experiments and all those research methods, surveys, interviews, they know what are the strengths and weaknesses because at least for paper 3 they've gone over it once. But things like triangulation, alternative explanations, reductionism, gender bias, culture bias, which applies to larger theories and concepts, not so much to individual studies, they've not even heard about these terms. These terms are prominently there in the mark schemes, in fact. If you look at the guidance for a discuss question, for example, or evaluate research question, it's written students can discuss these larger points. These points are there in the IB guide also, that these are possible but not exhaustive points on which critical thinking can be done for the theories and concepts. Students have not even seen them. They don't even know what they mean and they are writing ERQs. Whereas you have to know what these are, incorporate these in your ERQs, like I said, in the critical thinking about concept or theory, and plan on that basis. And you don't even know what these are. You've never even seen these terms in your life. On what basis are you preparing? Okay, so rethink your approach to the exam. Are you in the correct direction or not? Assess that with this video. Of course, there are many more misconceptions, but I'll take a last one for this video. Like, I'm just taking the top 5. The last misconception is I need to have backups for paper 1 and paper 2. Though I know that in the paper I am required to attempt only one approach for ERQs in paper 1, and for paper 2, if I'm in SL, only one option. If I'm in HL, two options. I need to write ERQs for. But I need to have a backup. What if I can't answer the question, which is what if something comes up which I did not anticipate? Then I should have one backup for that. Okay, one thing you might not know because you're in the IB, unless you have friends who are pursuing other boards like AQA or Cambridge, you might not be aware of the students who are at par with you, who are doing A levels instead of the IB diploma. In their year 2, they also select options. They also don't do all options. Like you select between abnormal, health, development, and relationships. You are given 4, you select 1 or 2 based on you are in SL or HL. Even in other boards, in AQA, for example, they have options very similar to yours, in fact. They also have relationships, abnormal or clinical psychology, and then they have some more also. They have more options. They have eating disorders, aggression, forensic psychology. From amongst these, they select 3 in total. You select 2. In Cambridge, there are 4 options: clinical, organizational, health, and consumer psychology. They select 2 out of these 4. It is standard practice in all boards to select 2, 3, 1 option, whatever, out of many which are provided for year 2. So that is not novel in the IB. So assuming that, they say do 1 or 2, but I need to do all of them because I need a backup, that is not the intention at all of the board. The intention is you focus on 1 or 2. They want you to master that 1 or 2 which is of your interest or your choice. This is the standard thing which is done in every board. So you do not have to prepare for multiple options as far as paper 2 is concerned. Where this anxiety comes from is because the planning stage is failing. That's why. Because, like I told you, the schools are taking an approach. This is the topic. Supposing most of you all will do clinical abnormal psychology. So say and most of you will do etiologies or explanations in that, like that will be your primary focus. So give one explanation for one or more disorders. That is the question. You are preparing one answer only. So you're preparing, supposing Caspi et al., Kendler et al., I'll explain depression with that. So I have my Caspi Kendler description and evaluations. Now if the wording of the question changes slightly in the paper and you get confused at the paper, because some students, they don't read the questions carefully in the past paper, but somehow when their paper comes in the final, suddenly they realize, oh, the question wording is looking like something I've not come across before. That time suddenly they take the effort to read very carefully. But anyways, jokes apart, so supposing the question comes in a way that, I get confused in the paper, so then I'll have a backup. So not only I have done abnormal, I've also done, say, development. I've just touched upon it as a backup, so I'll be able to write about that. If you take this planning approach which I have given you, this plan exhaustively covers all possible points that you would need in an answer. It does not exhaust all the questions that are possible. But what could you need to answer a question? Theory, critical points of the theory study, critical points of the study, all that is there in this. Then you will not need a backup. When the whole backup scheme comes into play is when you don't have a focused plan. So now if you follow what I'm telling you and you start making focused plans, you will not need the backup. So in paper 2, I very strongly recommend, the board, when they prepare your content, how much duration they want to give for your content on, they've thought very carefully. Very big experts have thought about these things and they have set up the syllabus. So follow their intent. They have thought for your best. They want you to do one or two options because they understand that is what you need to do. Stick with that. If they've told you to do two options as an HL student, you've selected abnormal and relations, do only those. Do them thoroughly. Instead of doing half-heartedly two and keeping just touching upon two more for backups. That is not the intention of the course at all, and of course that doesn't help you in answer writing in the paper. Why will they give an approach in the syllabus which they don't want you to keep up for the paper? Okay, do any one or two approaches as required by your SL or HL, but do it so well, plan it out so well that you don't need a backup. And the backup strategy fails for one more reason. Because I told you, they are deliberately making you do one or two options. It's not some secret that has been discovered. They have deliberately done it with proper intent. So what happens is, when you just touch upon this and touch upon that, you're nowhere. Like we say, jack of all trades, master of none. That becomes your situation. So neither case is going to help. You know what happens because of this, and this has actually happened. I got confused about my main primary focus, which was there, like say etiology for depression or whatever. I got confused about the question. And now the development one, I thought, okay, the development was my backup, let me do that one. So Piaget question came, and I had not done Piaget well because the terminology is heavy. So I had not studied very well. So I did try to write it, but I wrote very poorly. This is what happens on a backup. The main one you're not able to write at all, and the backup one you write very badly, and you just get 2 or 3 marks out of 22 for the answer. Is it worth it? What would be worth it is learning that one approach, that abnormal etiology, whatever you've selected, in so much detail to able to answer any question. If you go a little wrong, your marks won't come down very much. But this backup thing ends up getting you 2 or 3 marks because neither have you studied that one properly, not this one. You are nowhere when it comes to writing an ERQ. Confidence will come from making the right plans, from knowing exactly what comes in the paper, not from, I don't know what to say in English, I don't want to use a Hindi term, make do type of approach. That's the best I can translate. From a make do approach, you won't get uh, success in the paper. So what I've mentioned is, take up only as many options required, one or two, depending on SL or HL, but do them thoroughly. That also, I know many of you don't care about learning as such, in the sense you just want to get marks in the exam. But for those of you who do, who actually enjoy learning psychology, you get that kind of satisfaction of knowing something well. When you think of, I have to do abnormal also and I have to do development also for backup, for example, you're so torn between these things, you are so busy getting frustrated trying to balance out both the things, you lose interest, you lose enjoyment of psychology. And then you will be that ex-student next year who's advising all students, don't take up psychology, it's very bad. So instead of that, focus on one approach. It gives you the joy of learning also. When you are not stressed about, oh, I have to prepare one backup, and you just focus on, let me learn this one well, let me learn this etiology thoroughly because clinical is my passion, or I love development. Let me see what Piaget has said. Let me understand every concept that he's given. It's so meaningful. You enjoy learning psychology, and then you'll be that student who recommends psychology from front to others. So first, have a good grasp on the subject yourself. Go into its depth. That makes it enjoyable. And then only you will get the right experience out of it. Similarly, for the approaches in paper 1, there are 3: biological, cognitive, and socio-cultural. And why I left it for later, because it becomes a little more murky with the extensions part of it. So most teachers now I'm seeing currently, the approaches they will suggest, do one thoroughly, mostly cognitive. So do cognitive thoroughly and keep one for backup. So keep biological, for example, for backup. Then some of them would say, do cognitive thoroughly, do cognitive HL extension thoroughly. But the HL extensions are very difficult, and notes are not available enough online. So at least for the extension, keep one backup. Neither do you need a backup for the core option approach which you're selecting, nor do you need a backup for the extension. Even the HL extension you can do only for one. In fact, many students are taking this approach because for HL, one extension question is guaranteed in the paper. They will learn only the extensions across the three approaches, and they will not learn the core of any approach. Now I'll explain to you why I'm against both of these things. The first one, let me keep a backup core approach or let me keep a backup extension approach. Again, not required if you're planning correctly. All these things are required only when you're underconfident because you're not planning in the right direction. So same thing which I said for paper 2 applies here. You have not, let me take an example, animal ethics is there and animal methodology is there for extension in biological HL. You have not thought thoroughly about these points. You've just done that whole study evaluation business and you don't know larger picture of why ethics are important for animals, how they are different from human ethics, how they compare with human ethics. You've not prepared any of the core theory. That's why you are all tensed and you need to do one more extension back. If you were ready with all these things properly, you had considered them while planning, you had anticipated everything. Not all possible questions, but all possible sections that you would need. Then you would not have to do the whole backup business. So this is very similar to paper 2. As far as let me learn all the extension possible, biological, cognitive and sociocultural, and let me not do the core of anything. From an exam point of view, that's not much of a problem. In fact, it's a good exam strategy, I would say. From a learning point of view, it's going to be very challenging. See, ultimately, one core thing, which is there in IB, it's there in all psychology courses. And students are very resistant to accept this, but just accept this. You have to understand what is there in the content. You cannot memorize without understanding. Even if you're given 2 years, can you memorize 3 approaches, SAQs for all of them, ERQs for one of them, 1 or 2 options, ERQs for that or both of them, paper 3 research methods only on the basis of memory. Along with psychology, you have so many other subjects. As a human being, you're a human being, right? You can memorize all of this, just memorize without understanding anything. Am I supposed to believe that? You have to understand. Memory will come from understanding. There is no other way. There is no other way. Other way maybe is failing. Okay. So when memory is going to come from understanding, only if you understand, you're going to remember well. You need to know the core. If you look at, let's take cognitive HL extension, for example, digital technology, how it impacts memory. Any cognitive process as such, let's take memory. Because I know the Sparrow study and all are very popular. Now, you don't know what memory is because you didn't do the core of cognitive. You decided I'm just going to do the extensions. You don't know what memory is. Directly, you're trying to understand how technology impacts memory. How will you do that? For biological, extension is animals, like I said before, animal research. You have not understood what are neurotransmitters in general, what are genes in general. But you want to understand and you want to memorize animal studies in which genes have been manipulated, in which neurotransmitters have been manipulated. How are you going to understand? If you're not going to understand, my question is that way, how are you going to remember? For so many topics, for so many subjects, you're just going to mug up and you're going to go. Is it possible? So that cannot be a strategy. That is why I feel that whole thing of I'll just do the extensions, it's an extension. Extension means nothing without the core. Someone who has core knowledge can only extend it. I don't feel that works from a learning point of view. Yes, if your memory is out of the world, literally, it is super phenomenal and you can remember all that, go ahead, do that. Just do all the extensions, wonderful. But if you can't do that because you are an ordinary mortal like the rest of us, please don't do that. Please do the core first. Learn the core well so that you can relate with what is there in the extension. All these strategies really, in reality, leave imaginary world aside. They only lead to frustrations and disappointments. Be wise right from the beginning. That is my intent of making this video. As I was making this video, now we are coming to an end of it, I've realized a few things. One, I think I should just make a proper document with adding on some points to this and just make it available for a free download on my website. So I'll do that. I'll link it in the description box and pin comment so that you can always have these key misconceptions in front of you and you can avoid them. You can just look at them from time to time and make sure that you're not doing these things. Right now, I was talking to you as I was writing, was not able to write very well. So I'll put it up properly with proper writing and more points into it on my website. That's one. Second thing, as I speak, also I realize there are many more misconceptions, but the video becomes too long, so I'm not including all of them. You can use the comments box to put up those misconceptions. What have you learned, especially if you're a retake student, or at some point as you were giving your internals and all, you realize something is off about the way I'm being taught IB. What was that you realized? What was that misconception that you'd like to warn other students against? Put it in the comments box, because we can really expand on this and we can help out other students by making sure no one is making those mistakes. As they say, we learn from our own mistakes and we learn from the mistakes of others. So use your mistakes to help out other students. And one more thing, in the beginning, before I came to specific misconceptions, what I addressed is the conspiracy theories. The board is conspiring against some country or some student or something like that. One more larger issue that I want to address, besides the whole conspiracy thing. So this is not any particular misconception of IB. This is something across boards which is relevant to you also. So I just want to take it up, because these things which come a lot into student discussions, they reach us also. They reach teachers also. A lot of discussion nowadays goes around, I want to pursue psychology further. I want to pursue psychology in UG and PG. I want to do my PhD in psychology. So that's wonderful. Lots of students are very, very interested in doing psychology, and I'm very happy about that. But then, because of all this that they read, predicted grades are very high, but actually no one scores, they become afraid. Should I take it for my A levels? Should I take it for my IB or not? The university which I want to join does not have a requirement that in IB or A levels you should do psychology, then only you can enroll for it. Even if I've done other subjects, I can enroll. So should I do psychology at the IB or A levels, or should I just leave it? Why this fear has come? Because students are not getting good marks, and that is what we have dissected in this video. Why students are not getting good marks. So first thing, if you're a student or you know of a student who is on these lines, not sure whether they should take psychology at this level, think about it differently now. Why students are not scoring well? Because of poor approach that they are taking to exams, either because the schools are not guiding them correctly, which I've explained, or because they are not being attentive. They are not being careful about how they are planning. So remove that fear of you won't score well. You have 2 years to plan out. With the right approach, you'll score well. So if scoring is the reason why you don't want to take psychology, just drop it from your mind and go ahead with what you like. Think of it this way: whether you're doing IB or A levels, you have to give 2 years with the subject. Other subjects also there with one more. You already know you like psychology, you already have a passion for it. Maybe you don't like other subjects as much, maybe you don't like them at all. Why not have at least one subject that brings you genuine joy in learning, which will make your 2 years experience so beautiful, because you're doing something you like, just out of the fear that I won't score just for that. Leaving something which interests you, which can keep you happy, and that happy mood can uplift your learning of the other subjects also. How is that wise? Okay, that's one way of thinking about it. Second, if you're the more so-called practical person and you are still only concerned about scoring, I'll give you another perspective also. Recently, I was approached by this student for tuition, and she's retaking. In fact, the whole course she's doing all over again. Why? Because she was guided this way, I would say misguided this way, that don't take psychology because you scored badly and it's not a requirement, though she wants to pursue psychology. So she took other subjects. I think she took economics, sociology, and maybe history. And she did very poorly on all those subjects. Very poorly. She's got very bad result. So now she is retaking. She's going to take psychology now and she'll do. Now, if you're that very practical person, was this practical of her, what she has done? You have assumed that because psychology is difficult to school, let me take some other subjects. What is the guarantee that you will score in those subjects? You are interested in psychology, so you're putting out a question on some discussion forum, Reddit or Discord or whatever. And you're asking, should I take psychology or not? And disgruntled students who did not do well in psychology, they are the ones who are coming and advising you, don't do it. First of all, however harsh it sounds, what is the credibility of these students asking you not to do it? Do you have any background to them? Why they didn't do well? They don't even tell you most of the times. They just tell you those conspiracy things. The board is deliberately not giving marks and all. So first of all, just don't get into these things. They're very negative and they're senseless, to be honest. That's one. Second is, you haven't taken advice from any right person. Okay, you might feel I have vested interest. Psychology teachers, of course, they're going to say psychology is good, but you haven't asked a neutral person either. You're going by a heavily biased opinion on your subject choice. Thirdly, more importantly, because you have put up something on psychology, the answer you're getting is related to that. Now you decide, let me take another subject. Okay, psychology is difficult to school, let me take history. Did you ask someone who's disgruntled with history? They would have told you the same thing. Don't take history. The board purposely gives you bad marks. These conspiracy theories which are there, this subject purposely they fail you, that they go on around for every subject. You are interested in one subject, so you find out only about that. This thing goes around for all the subjects. Wherever a student doesn't do well, they blame the board and they spread the word because they are upset. They go on all portals and they remove their frustration there. So if that is going to be your basis for selecting the subject, it's going to be a wrong basis. And like I gave you the example, this student who has done very badly despite dropping psychology. She thought she was doing something very wise. Now she really regrets it. How many years she's wasted in this? So dropping psychology, taking other subjects, no guarantee that you're going to score well. In fact, with the right guidance, if you're going to score well in psychology, what it's going to help you with is, okay, in undergraduate also you can pick up psychology for the first time. They do help you with the basics in undergrad also. But it'll be much easier for you because you've already done it in IB, you've already done it in A levels. So for you, it's just going to be a revision. You're making your future much easier by doing it in A levels here. And then in that future, when you have to do psychology at undergraduate, you're so confident about psychology because you've already done it. So no anxiety, no fear, nothing. And even better, your mind is free of all fear. Your time is getting saved because you already know from your IBA levels. In fact, you know psychology so well. You can devote that time for doing some extracurricular activities in your college or for learning another subject well in your college. So practically, you can save up time for your college in your college years because you're already having a background in the subject to pursue other interests that you have that time. So why not take psychology right now? Why not take psychology, prepare it with the right approach, get good marks, be super prepared for your undergraduate course, regardless of psychology is a requirement or not, and then enjoy your undergraduate years and use that time for more research reading. If you're not interested in other things, to develop more in psychology only, to learn more about psychology beyond the basics, because you gave these years, you invested them in learning psychology. And those years when your other students who've not done psychology before, they're going to struggle with the basics, they're going to clear their basics, you're going to go ahead, you're going to learn more about psychology than they can because they are still with the basics right now. You're going to reach an advanced level. So, in fact, taking something else instead of psychology, taking history or geography or whatever, those are wonderful subjects. If you're interested in them, please take them. But taking them just to avoid psychology, you're wasting your time there. So, if you're a practical person, how can you waste your time doing history or something or economics, whichever it is, instead of psychology, which is going to practically serve you in the future? So, there's no basis to these arguments. And finally, last note, because today I've taken the discussion type of approach, so let me bring up these thoughts also. Overall, it is really good that you all go on Reddit, Discord, and I don't know which other popular platforms are there, maybe Facebook, and I'm not very aware. My students generally talk about Reddit and Discord, so I'm more familiar with them. It's very good. You all are sharing things, you all are sharing insights, you're in touch with each other socially, emotionally, you all feel good. Please use those platforms for those things. I really encourage. But when it comes to making choices, life changing choices, your life depends on your career. What career you're going to make, say in psychology. Most of the hours of your day in future, every day, are going to be invested in that career. Please don't decide which subjects to take, which career path to pursue on the opinions of some, even if it sounds harsh, unknown people. You feel you know them very well. You don't know really who they are, what is their agenda, what is their background. At best, just being careless about advising things. Don't decide on their basis. Think critically, think carefully, consult your school teachers, and then decide, or any trusted qualified person who's there, and then decide what you want to do. And do not give into conspiracy theories and whatever it is. It wastes your energy, it makes your mind very negative, and that passion which you have for a subject, it really finishes it. It takes away all the joy of your life when you keep on reading negative after negative things, which is even without evidence. That's so ironical. Something doesn't even have a basis, and lengthy discussions are going on that. Please stay away from these aspects of social media. Use it for good, use it to enjoy, don't get off it at all. But don't give into these sort of discussions. When you are on a forum like Reddit or Discord, chats are going on. It's your choice which chat you want to engage in and which you don't want to engage in. Engage in the useful ones. Don't engage in those which bring down your energy. If there's something substantial, something with evidence which is being spoken, you should be alert. But just people's opinions, don't get entangled with those things. So that is what I would like to suggest to you today. If you have any suggestions, any feedback on the video, or any questions about it, or you want to advise me on what to make ahead, please use the comments box for that. Please do not reach out to me personally for anything to do with these videos. I will not respond. Also, if you want to schedule your classes with me, you want IB classes, or you want me to evaluate your answer writing work, your writing answers, you want feedback for that, thorough feedback, or you want me to guide you through your IA or EE in psychology, definitely you can contact me on my personal number that I've left in the description box and pin comment below, or you can email me on my email ID. I tutor internationally across the globe, so you can reach out to me from anywhere. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it's useful to you. Individual lessons are helpful. You've been giving me feedback. Thank you. I'm glad to have helped you. What about these type of videos in which we discuss overarching issues in psychology? Are they useful to you? Would you like to see more videos of this type? Let me know in the comments box below. That's all I have for you today. Next video hopefully will be a lesson. I'm more interested in lessons. I think I would like to cover the remaining two options of paper 2 November 2024 in the next video. So hopefully that's going to be up next. Thank you for watching and all the best for your preparation for IB. Goodbye.